Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here on Thursday afternoon, the last day of the conference. Still good show up for this session on financing and governance. So we've been in this conference for a couple of days now. We've seen there's a lot of developments in smart cities, but how do we finance that? And also, how do we make sure that we create an inclusive smart city? That's where this session is about. And I'm really glad that we have some really great speakers from all over the world, people flying in from China, from the US, to come here to give a presentation to tell you about new financing models, new ways how to create an inclusive economic development in your local cities. So my name is Ronald Kleverlaan. I'm the chair of this session. You will not see me that much on this stage. I will just introduce the different speakers here. But I just want to kick off with a few examples and a few challenges that I've noticed that most of the smart cities have in Europe, but in fact also everywhere over the world. So these big questions about the energy transition. How do you finance the energy transition? These are not possible just by only the traditional financial models, but also how do you make sure that you get also the support from your citizens? Don't have the whole NIMBY movement going on. Local food. We need to create more food for cities, but also local food, sustainable development for that. But most of them are small-scale projects. How do you finance that? Housing, social housing. Especially a lot of bottom-up initiatives coming up in areas cannot be financed on a traditional way. How do you cover that? And last but not least, nature-based solutions. How do we make cities greener and make it better for people to live in these cities? So these are a few of these main challenges that we've noticed in our research. I'm an academic researcher, and I like to know, I see that we now have some really good examples, good speakers now today that will reflect on a few of these topics. But they also have their own insight, they all have their own models, how to support this economic development. We will start with Ania Williams. She's co-founder of Zebras Unite, and she will explain everything about Zebras Unite. But it's an organization that is supporting new types of financial models for companies. So you don't just have the companies that are going for a bank loan. You don't just have the companies going for venture capital, becoming the unicorn, not very inclusive. So she is doing a lot of research and she's really supporting a lot of companies that want to do much more inclusive economic development. So please welcome Ania Williams.
Okay. There we go. A little bit of a delay. All right. Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing today? Yeah, lots of energy, I see. Okay. I'm excited to be here. And just so you know, the deck that I'm presenting you can download from my website, aniawilliams.com/SCEWC19. Okay. So my name is Ania Williams. I'm here today from San Francisco. And I've been there for the last 9 years working in startups. I worked there for a tech company called Voxer for a few years, and then I had this idea that I felt like I just had to pursue. It was for a necklace that would transform into headphones. Something where you wouldn't know that it was anything other than a piece of jewelry until someone went to, pull out earbuds. And I didn't realize at the time how lucky I was, but I got the support from the founder of the company that I was working at Voxer, who happened to be an angel investor. And once he committed to becoming my first investor, I essentially decided that I was going to quit working for him and start a new company with part of his money. And it was a really, really magical moment. I left my leadership role as the head of marketing at Voxer at the time and started a fashion tech company called Tinsel. I assembled an incredible team of women, and we designed the world's first audio necklace from scratch. We crowdfunded it. We manufactured the product in China. We got a utility patent for it, which is pretty cool. And within 2 years, we went from idea to shipping it to our customers. We made a lot of women very happy. We had a good run. But I shut the company down earlier this year. Why, you may be wondering. Well, it was a startup, and there's a ton of reasons we can point to things that probably went wrong. But one major issue was having extremely modest capital resources to begin with. Well, over the lifetime of the company, we raised just under $500,000. And while that might be more than what many startup founders raise, if you're building a hardware company, it's like breaking open your piggy bank to go and buy a Rolex. But I learned a lot while I was fundraising for Tinsel, including the ins and outs of venture capital and the inequities that exist with access to capital for women and people of color and other underrepresented groups. And that set me on a different mission. The first was starting a nonprofit called Black and Brown Founders. We help Black and Latinx people start tech and tech-enabled businesses. And during my journey, I discovered the abysmal statistics around funding for people of color. And I wanted to provide them with a culturally relevant way to launch a startup with modest resources that most of them are coming into it with. And because, while the United States is definitely a powerhouse around venture capital, less than 2% of that goes to people of color. And I'm determined to show people what they can do despite not being backed in the same ways as their peers. And I also wanted to push for change on the other side of the table. Oh, too much. There we go. So my other mission became to create more ethical and sustainable alternatives to startup funding, business structures, and culture around startups. Can I see a show of hands here? How many people in this room are investors? No? Okay. And how many people know what venture capital is or what a unicorn is? Okay, all right, cool. Well, if you don't know, it's a startup that is valued at $1 billion or more. And there are a ton of implications for this, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But I wanted to be a part of building a movement that was going to serve as a counterpoint to unicorn culture. Something that's real. And we call it the zebra. So again, I'll share a bit more about the difference between unicorns and zebras in a second. But I also became a co-founder of an organization called Zebras Unite. And today we have a growing global community of over 2,000 people who are entrepreneurs, investors, and other operators of a different stripe. So now that you know a little bit about where I'm coming from, there are 3 things that I want you to know by the end of this talk. 1, that purpose and profit do not have to be mutually exclusive. 2, that founder-aligned considerate capital is better for everyone. And 3, that there are not enough funding options for new businesses today, especially startups looking to make meaningful improvements to the world. I'll also share some newly emerging trends for funding vehicles that investors are testing out. So let's get into it. All right, number 1, purpose and profit do not have to be mutually exclusive, though we do need to be intentional about what it is that we monetize. And this applies to how a company serves its market and also how the company functions. I believe that this problem stems from the idea that the only mission of a company is to maximize profits for its shareholders. By contrast, social enterprises, social ventures, social impact startups, zebras, whatever you want to call them, what usually distinguishes these kinds of companies is that the company leadership has decided to care about more than the shareholders. They remain committed to identifying opportunities that are profitable and want to generate returns, but they're also conscious of the many stakeholders that their business touches. For example, Uber is not a social impact business, but it has a hell of a social impact. The sharing economy term that gets thrown around is somewhat misleading because it's not an example of truly sharing or even reinvesting its revenues into the workers or the equipment that's needed for the business to be possible. So looking at a little bit of a comparison between unicorns and zebras. Again, you can download this deck at my website, but you can compare and contrast. We're talking about exponential growth versus sustainable growth, exits and liquidity events over profits and healthy revenues, a zero-sum game with winners and losers over win-win scenarios, competition over collaboration, hoarding over sharing, more versus enough. This is a quote from the CEO of Patagonia, a bee company that makes really superior outdoors products and are known for their efforts towards environmental conservation. So Rose Mercurio said that, "I don't think it's a conflict of interest to say that you can make money and have a prosperous and successful business, and you can also do good in the world." She also said that capitalism needs to evolve if we're going to have a healthy planet and we're going to have healthy people on that planet. There's finally a new conversation forming around the idea of a quadruple bottom line, creating value for customers, employees, society, and shareholders. This is a quick case study. Levi's recently talked about their efforts to transition to more sustainable fabrics. They're experimenting with ways to soften hemp, which requires less water and chemicals to cultivate it. Their head of innovation, Paul Dillinger, believes that you don't have to sacrifice to buy sustainably. We also have the rise of B corporations like Patagonia, also Allbirds, Caspa, Bombas, Athleta, and we're seeing increased interest in worker cooperatives in the tech industry. People want to create companies that reward the collective contributions of the makers and the doers that make the business possible. And co-ops usually allow both the owners and the employees the opportunity to participate in the business's success. Stocksy, a stock photo platform, is a great example of this. They're an artist-owned cooperative, and they make sure that their shareholder artists receive fair pay. 50 to 75% of all licenses go directly to their contributors. And they advocate that a sense of community and ownership felt by the members drives a greater level of passion into their work and results in higher quality imagery for their customers, so it improves the product. Brianna Wetlaufer, their co-founder and former CEO, said that when you use this approach, you're investing in the long-term success, integrity, and the people working for the product. You shouldn't have to make choices that are intentionally designed for short-term gain at a huge cost. And she's right. In the United States, corporate profit margins have been rising for 15 years and are now at their highest levels ever, but the corporate wages have been declining for over 4 decades and are at their near lowest levels ever. Basecamp is another example. Jason Fried and David Hannemeyer Hansen are vocal advocates for building calm companies and not the biggest company possible. What matters to them is that the business is sustainable alongside being profitable. Buffer, I think last year, spent $3.3 million buying out their investors because they were growing too rapidly. Their expenses got out of control. They had to lay off workers to make the numbers work. And then their growth rate became too slow for their investors, and so they decided to dig into what they believed was right. And as a result, they created better alignment with their values as a company, and this year they surpassed over $20 million in annual revenue. SparkToro is another example. When Rand Fishkin, who's the former CEO of Moz, which is known for having raised over $30 million in VC funding, started a new company called SparkToro, he wrote that we believe that there's room for a company that can be successful for customers, employees, founders, and investors, generally in that order, without demanding a multi-hundred million or billion-dollar outcome. We spent a lot of time discussing the frustrating binary of the classic tech startup model and how we might craft a creative structure that would allow for potential of a huge outcome without forcing an unhealthy growth rate or a destructively impatient approach. So, as I said, purpose and profit can exist. No specific company structure or funding vehicle is a silver bullet, but we must be intentional in how we look at these solutions. Okay. Number 2, founder-aligned funding, or what I like to call considerate capital, goes a long way. And what do I mean by founder-aligned? Well, startups are incredibly hard. They're physically and emotionally draining, and entrepreneurship is an incredibly isolating and unforgiving job. So I mean capital solutions in terms that don't weaponize risk against the founder and can do more to ensure their psychological safety while they're building their companies. So really this speaks to the investor interest and disposition. And we just discussed the sea change that's building with more conscious companies. This is also important at the funding level. So having a soul when you're investing in companies and really thinking about it from the angle of if you want to protect your investment, it behooves you to understand the strengths and the vulnerabilities of the entrepreneurs that are responsible for building it. At a high level, this is a list of the most common funding sources for startups in the United States. Savings and credit cards are the most common option, but involve the most risk for the entrepreneur. And you have to also couple that with the fact that 40% of Americans say that they cannot afford a $400 emergency expense. They're broke. So, business loans from banks aren't a real option for most people either, because most startups don't have the collateral or might be too high growth to get a loan. But even if they could, small business lending in the US has plummeted since the financial crisis in 2008, and it remains down 40% since the pre-crisis levels. Some have family, friends, and network connections, but that tends to benefit the privileged, and it's not really an option for people who are already marginalized. They tend to be the ones that are supporting their friends and family. Crowdfunding requires sophisticated marketing. It's an incredibly noisy marketplace, and for some, their efforts might just be better spent making sales. Grants can be a viable path, but those are mostly available for scientific research, and private equity typically isn't an option for starting up. It's reserved for growth stage capital needs. And then you have venture capital, which is the most common financing that startups go after beyond what they might already have, and it has its own issues. So I want to take a quick minute to kind of talk about what venture capital is, which it's basically a type of business financing that goes to small, early stage emerging companies that are believed to have really high growth potential or have demonstrated high growth. These companies are expected to go from $0 to $1 billion or more of an exit in 5 to 10 years, usually through an IPO or an acquisition. Anything less than that $1 billion exit is usually considered a failure on the part of its investors. And to understand why that is, we should run through this super quick, simple primer on VC. So venture capitalists are investors who also have investors, and those are called limited partners, or LPs. And the VCs are expected to return at least 3x what their LPs invest in their funds. Where does that money come from? In the United States, most of that comes from pension funds, endowments, insurance funds, banks, very rich people. What they all have in common is that they're usually very large pools of money that they're trying to grow so that they can beat the rate of inflation over time. And the way that works, as I mentioned, LPs invest in a VC fund. The fund is then invested in startups. They're expecting 1 or 2 huge exits to happen through an IPO or an acquisition, and then everybody makes money. The exits have to be in the billions of dollars because 90% of the startups fail. Something like 80% of the returns come from 20% of the startups that VCs invest in. So the idea is that as long as 1 or 2 companies in the portfolio beat the odds, the numbers will work out. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. When VC works well, it works extremely well. And when you have the right idea at the right time, in the right market, and the right team, sure. But this is highly variable and unpredictable. And the issue is that it doesn't work out most of the time. This is because most businesses are not really fit to scale, especially within 10 years, to the size of a billion-dollar company. And when used responsibly, this kind of funding can support innovation and value creation. But venture capital is also a very specific type of financing that seems to masquerade as the de facto way to fund a business in the startup world. So it's kind of become a proxy for ambition and success, really, through the entire hype machine behind venture capital. And so, really, building a profitable business should be the ultimate goal. But even in cases where the business is right for VC funding, women, people of color, other minorities are disastrously underfunded. It's nowhere near being an equitable system. And as it turns out, billion-dollar exits are really hard. And what happens a lot of the time is that founders launch too fast, they scale too fast, they hire too fast. VC-backed startups easily become environments for careless behavior, exploitation, questionable morals. Decisions get made that can be bad for the business, for the industry, or for the people that are working there. The companies are more likely to extract value from existing communities and workers in harmful ways. And founders can lose control of their own companies if they're not performing up to the expectation of their investors. So that, in turn, puts entrepreneurs on this hamster wheel of raising funds, and that fundraising kind of becomes their business model. And many startups kind of die along this journey, but some get stuck in this kind of too much investment to fail space, and they get pushed to exit. Taken even further, it's not a requirement for investors to ensure that the companies that they bring to market are companies that have longevity. Once the IPO happens, their money's already made. So, as an example, Uber is one popular one that kind of fits in that too much investment to fail category. The company raised over $24 billion, and while Uber collects over $45 billion in gross passenger revenue and sees a major share of the urban car service market, it has no solid path to profitability. We're seeing similar trends with other 2019 IPOs from venture-backed startups such as Lyft, Peloton, Slack. They've all tumbled on the stock exchange. WeWork has nearly crumbled since merely attempting to IPO. Venture capital is now creating risk and volatility in public markets. So, arguably with Uber, VC has really just been a $24 billion privately funded subsidy for transportation, and we still do not know how it's going to end. So why are we staking so much on these odds? This is Rakaia Adams. She's a decision maker for funds in Oregon that serve as LPs. And she said that we should take seriously our role in driving some of the destabilizing forces in society. So a new conversation is starting to form around the efficacy of venture capital. And that dirty secret that I mentioned is that most funds aren't successful. Much like the companies that they invest in, the system produces a lot of losers and a few winners. And one well-known investor estimated that at the maximum, 12% of VCs can be considered successful. The Kauffman Foundation has done a lot of comprehensive research on this. In fact, they did a report in 2012 that found that LPs invest too much capital in underperforming venture capital funds on frequently misaligned terms. Number 2, founder-aligned capital is better. So the takeaway here is that we have enough evidence to show that VC alone isn't sufficient at returning its promised growth. It's time that we expand the pool of options. There's an overhaul required to get institutional values to match those of most of the people. But what the Zebras movement really wants to do is to help diversify the ways in which we deploy that capital, while we're also building businesses that can turn a profit, make ethical choices, and be intentional about its social impact. All right, so to put it bluntly, there's no commonly accepted funding option for entrepreneurs who don't know how much growth potential their solution is going to end up having. This is Bryce Roberts from Indie VC. He said, "We think that there's going to be a tsunami of entrepreneurs who have experienced the one-size-fits-all venture model and want to cherry-pick the pieces that work for them. Indie VC is innovating in this space with funding terms that are revenue-based. They want to cultivate entrepreneurs who have a focus on raising their revenue and their profits and not their next round of funding. They write checks ranging from $100K to $1 million. They own a percentage of the company if a founder chooses to raise a round or sell. They hold on to a portion of equity, which a founder buys back over time by paying Indie VC a portion of its revenue. And the return multiple is 3 to 5x. And once that occurs, they retain a 1% equity in that company. And this month, they also launched a scout program so that they can help to cultivate a new generation of entrepreneurs that are investing in alternative ways and are actually going to pay them cash for the deal flow that results in their referrals. Also, if you download this deck, you can kind of see here, there's a lot of different experiments that are happening to fill in the gap in the market. We can really be doing so much more. Many entrepreneurs are lacking a fundamental education around capital systems, how they work, who wins, who loses, and why. We need to change this. This diagram shows a work in progress of what startup capital options exist today. Again, you can download this at aniawilliams.com/SCEWC19. And these are a few of the more popular experiments that are happening right now. You might notice that thematically, these are ways to invest that are extremely founder-friendly, and that's part of what increases the likelihood of success for entrepreneurs and encourages the participation of others who might not have been able to start a business. So revenue-based investments, fellowships, geography-based investments, loans with loss guarantees. Regarding the revenue-based investments at Indie VC, all of the companies that they've invested in are still alive. One has paid back 5x what they were invested in. And they expect to have companies that die, but fewer that go out of business than a typical fund. And some are likely to be good businesses, but not great investments. But they still expect to return the baseline of the fund, and a meaningful equity exit for them would only have to be in the tens of millions or the hundreds of millions versus the billions. for fellowships, you can think about it in terms of like the MacArthur Genius Grants, where there's kind of like little to no strings attached funding that's meant to provide seed money for intellectual, social, artistic endeavors. And those are usually offered to founders that are perceived to be highly motivated or talented. Some organizations also leverage those fellowships to have a chance to invest in whatever the founder is working on, what comes out of that. Geography-based investments or place-based investments are when they're making an investment into an entire ecosystem, from buildings to services and businesses. The idea is that the area can be revitalized or transformed, and its realized potential goes back to those who seeded the capital into making it happen. And then there's loans with loss guarantees, where there's still an expectation that the money is going to be paid back, but by offering a founder-friendly terms around the payment schedule, forgiveness, and leniency. So again, taking the psychological burden off of the founder, giving them more flexibility. Losses are expected, but at a much lesser rate than VC. So Zebras is currently surveying the founders in our community so we can map out their needs in comparison to what exists. We want to match people with existing solutions that are a good fit for them. And where there are none, we want to create new solutions that are going to be more equitable and still produce returns that investors are looking for. So what you can do, study up, keep up with the conversation. Feel free to join our Dazzle. A Dazzle, by the way, is a herd of zebras, at zebrasunite.com. And if you decide to invest, just start to think about looking where others aren't looking. I think underrepresented entrepreneurs are often underestimated and have a perspective on solving problems that haven't yet been met. I think this can yield a lot of untapped opportunities. And also, don't forget, I've uploaded this deck on my website at aniawilliams.com, SEEWC19. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ania. Very interesting presentation. A lot of information, and I think also a lot of interesting options we've shown to. Quickly move over to Raman Gras and Jeremy Burke from Aretian Urban Analytics and Design. I hope I pronounced it right. They're Harvard-based researchers, and they produced a very in-depth data analytics tool on building inclusive communities. So, can I ask you to come to the front? Thank you.
Do you have the clicker?
No.
Do we see it? Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here presenting and sharing the insights of our research and also of the Atlas of Innovation Districts project that my fellow co-founder, Jeremy Burke, and myself, we have developed at Harvard University over the last several years. Essentially, the project started as a research project at Harvard University between the schools of design and engineering, but it translated into a city analytics tool that we convey through our startup Aretian Urban Analytics and Design that we can use to provide insights to city government officials and other decision makers around economic development, urban development, and innovation districts in general. Essentially, the theoretical foundation for our model is the follow-up work to research developed over the last 12 years by a couple of research teams between Harvard and MIT, led by Professor Ricardo Hausman at the Kennedy School and Professor Cesar Hidalgo at MIT. And what they do is they have created this network theory-driven data science model that conveys and summarizes what is the collective know-how of nations around the world. You can access it openly. It's called the Atlas of Economic Complexity. And you can pick and choose each and every country around the world and understand which are the comparative strengths in terms of the collective know-how of these nations. Because the main insight from the research is that the main indicator that has the highest level of accuracy in terms of predicting economic growth and economic success and also distributed prosperity is the collective know-how that society has in terms of what is the network of knowledge, talent, and industries that create competitiveness and allow this nation to be propelling their economic progress. Now, the main limitation that this model has is that essentially it's only limited to aggregate indexes at the national level. So they've been using it to provide advice and guidance to national governments around the world. But the problem is that provided that the majority of decision making occurs at the city level or at the regional level or metropolitan level, that tool cannot provide insights by itself. So that's basically what Jeremy and I have been developing over the last several years. And we conveyed the insights of our research through the so-called Atlas of Innovation Districts, where in the first 10 essentially, we have analyzed systematically how the top 50 innovation districts across the United States, in cities like New York, in Austin, in the Boston area, in California, in Boulder, Colorado, and many others, shape their innovation communities. And essentially, the type of analysis we want to do is how do different types of urban development impact economic development, and how do they enable economic growth, prosperity, and more egalitarian economic and inclusive economic growth. And the main lesson that we learn is that there are three types of networks that contribute to that economic growth. It's the network of talent, the individual persons that work in concert in companies or in local governments, in technology transfer entities, in research centers, to develop new solutions, new products and new services to address complex problems facing society. The second type of network is what we call the network of organizational structures, essentially research centers, technology firms, technology transfer entities, and how do people relate to one another to create these new solutions. And finally, the network of urban infrastructure, how do we design the physical spaces in our cities to unleash this economic growth. And in that sense, we have created profiles of these top 50 innovation districts across the US, and in which we basically summarize how these three networks are characterized and how those three networks shape the economic growth and the economic development of these communities. And here you can see some examples, like the case of Boston Seaport in southeastern Boston, Silicon Alley in Midtown Manhattan in New York, or the Pittsburgh Innovation District, among many others. Now, essentially, when you jump into these one-sheet summary profiles for these different innovation districts, what we provide is a high-level summary of how do these three networks, of the quality of the network of talent, the quality of the urban infrastructure, and the quality of the network of industries that play out, contribute to the economic growth of the area. And essentially, by having this deeper understanding of what is the regional or local collective know-how of that district, what we can do is have a much better understanding of how does that community or that district shape the future of economic growth within the region. And now my fellow co-founder and research colleague, Jeremy Burke, will start describing some of the main discoveries and insights from the project.
Thank you. So the Atlas is available for download on our website, aretian.com, where you can read the summary as well as have access to the 50 one-page profiles of the innovation districts throughout the United States. Also on our website, you can see here a description of all the different innovation districts across the entire United States. Each single one of these dots represents a part of the census within the United States, as well as the information that we have on the businesses, and as well as the innovation metrics for each district. So through this map, you can zoom in and out. You can click on any one of the districts, and you can see what is the composition and the profile of these urban communities. When we look at some of the findings, we can really see that innovation districts tend to be good for the communities in that they generally are providing new types of innovation, on average 3.4 times more than a regular district. But they also have other benefits. They have 9 times more employment, 15 times more knowledge-intensive employment. Overall, they provide 20 times more wealth per citizen, and also they have 5 times more job support and creation. We see that these innovation districts are also generally meritocratic, so often people who are hardworking and put in the effort to build and start a new company, along with the right type of financing and capital, tend to perform well. When we look at the vast majority of different types of innovation districts, here specifically looking at the Boston ecosystem, we can compare and contrast how innovative each district is to one another. Here in yellow you see the Kendall and MIT district, In red, Harvard Square. In purple, you have the Longwood Medical Center. And then in green, you have the Boston Seaport District. The Boston Seaport District was modeled after the 22 Arroba District here in Barcelona. And often the question is, are some of these areas really economic zones or are they innovation districts? Here we're able to show through our analysis that this is actually more of an economic district than an innovation district based on the total number of people who are working in innovation-related activities. One thing that we're very interested in is understanding how are these districts created, what are their anchor institutions, what types of urban design characteristics do they have, how do they give back to the community, and what are their general effects for the broader society. In order to do this, we have created ultimately analysis on 5 different anchor institution types. We think this is important for financing models and also for new urban development projects because the leading institution, which makes an effort in order to contribute to new development projects, ultimately has an impact on the type of community that will be created. So if we compare, for example, a city government-led effort versus one which is driven by entrepreneurs, we can see that the city government has generally more inclusive housing, public space, and amenities for the general population, whereas some of the other clusters, such as the entrepreneurial, tend to have more urban chaos. They can have greater levels of inefficiencies because they are driven mostly by growth models. Many of the other clusters, such as industry clusters, can provide high levels of employment, but generally they focus on a single industry. One reason why we are mapping out all of these different types and classifying them across the United States is because every single one of these efforts is a single design option. Unlike with a product design where you can iterate, such as with the iPhone, you can have multiple types coming out and generation after generation. In terms of urban development, you can really only do it once, and the impact will last for many, many years into the future. Therefore, we want to be able to provide decision makers the right types of information so that they can make the best decision at the beginning of the project to then finance everything moving forward. Overall, when we begin to look and filter through some of the data, we can easily see where the most innovative communities are throughout the United States. Overall, we can see that innovation is ultimately very difficult. Out of the total population in the United States, there's generally 3 million people working in these areas, and really 1 million of them are doing the technical work that's driving the innovation. So when we're looking at either education policies or organizational policies or also this competition for talent, we can see that here its innovation is really difficult, and these numbers support that. In addition, we wanted to understand from a design perspective how we can design the right types of environments to support innovation. Here, this graph talks about the right levels of density in terms of building height and concentration for supporting innovation. We consider it like a phase change. You can have a low-dense urban environment of suburban communities. You can have mid-rise buildings, and then you can have high-rise buildings. What we see is that innovation tends to be the most strong in communities where the building heights are between 5 and 7 stories. Basically, this means that there's enough density of high-performing individuals and companies located in a geographic area, but there's not necessarily the urban chaos and all the other necessities which are required to support life in high-density environments like New York City. We're also interested in terms of governing and finance. We want to know what are the trade-offs. If you do this, what will be the outcome? So here we have in our model basically 5 phases for urban innovation, of which in 2 of them, the first and the third, we can begin to have an effort to shape and inform both the urban design, but then also the organizational structures of these communities. So the first one, looking at the inputs, what types of spaces are we going to be building? What companies are we going to bring into our community? What density are we going to have? That's the first one. That ultimately sets the levels of innovation intensity that will then be in existence in that community. Then we can look at the innovation dynamics. What are the policies and the procedures that are going to support the teams going on into the future? Just as in the first talk, the founder's journey is rather difficult, and we can see in such good examples such as the MIT community, there's many different support mechanisms that are in place to help founders and companies complete the journey, both in terms of financing and capital, but also just organizational and legal considerations. With this, we can then ultimately measure what is the performance. So what are generally the new types of patents, the products, and the new services which are created within each industry based on location. And then we can see what are the overall societal benefits. Just to show you some examples of different areas, we can compare and contrast apples to apples these different areas around the US. And in addition, we are beginning to expand this atlas into Europe, and then we hope to go into other areas of the world as well. We're interested also in understanding what are the phasing and the needs of these communities. And here in this hierarchy of needs, this pyramid, in order to have a really thriving urban ecosystem, there are many steps that are necessary in order to achieve that. And here we basically lay out this diagram in order to allow communities to assess whether or not they are meeting all of these different goals. And often when you find a community which might be unequal or unfair, then maybe they're missing some of these components. And so we think it's important to assess urban ecosystems in this way. Lastly, before Ramon finishes up, when we look at and contrast the different ecosystems across one another, we can see what are their general contributions and how do they match up against one another. In this graph, what we're looking at is what are the total number of people that are actually working inside of these communities on innovation-related activities. And on the top, you have the Oak Ridge Laboratory in Tennessee, which is home of the world's fastest supercomputer. This is one of the US government's research facilities that's really doing high levels of innovation, and one of the innovation types that we spoke about before. Then at the bottom we have Cornell Tech, which is a brand new innovation center aligned with Cornell University. And this is a district which is just starting. It's only in its 3rd year in existence. And so we are able to map and see how these innovation districts change over time.
And in essence, what we would like to convey today with you is that the insights of the data-driven, rigorous scientific research that we have conveyed over the last several years around how different types of urban development, knowledge-intensive activity concentration, as well as economic development shape our communities. We think that both the existing insights that we shared through the report and the interactive map, as well as the tool that we have developed that can be deployed in the States, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, Latin America, in Asia and beyond, can help provide insights to provide decision-making in terms of how should we finance our communities in the future, what should be the main drivers for the economic growth, what are the local networks of talent, what is the competitive advantage of our community, and how should we devote our efforts so that we have inclusive growth. And with those final thoughts, we would extremely appreciate if you can join us for the discussion. Thank you so much.
I think we have a few minutes left, so please take a seat. Because this is an interesting, very interesting research and a lot of data you've been analyzed and a lot of interesting models, but it's very high level still. And I can imagine there are a lot of policymakers here at city level on the floor are here, and especially looking for what can they learn from this, especially about financing. So can you explain a bit about that? So for example, does it help them for risk reduction or how to structure specific public-private partnerships?
Absolutely. And one of the first things that we should mention in that regard is that the insights from the research and the types of recommendations that the model provides can help decrease dramatically the uncertainty about many of these decisions. Very often, city government officials and decision makers about economic development and urban development make a lot of decisions that are critical for the community using gut feeling or very traditional methods that do not encompass the complexity and do not explain what are going to be the types of externalities, both positive and negative, of these types of urban and economic development. In that sense, the model, the urban analytics engine specific for the Atlas of Innovation Districts, can decrease the uncertainty about those decisions and provide ranges of what could be the different expected outcome in terms of potential gentrification processes, for example, for the community, or to what extent that's going to be contributing to decrease the level of unemployment, for example, or induce growth in wages for the community, among other things, as well as when you are mindful of the 5 types of entities or institutions that are shaping this urban and economic development, you can have a much better understanding of how should we structure the finance models to support those 5 anchor institutions to succeed in their endeavor.
Okay, very interesting. And I see that this we have to conclude this session. I still have a lot of other questions, and I guess some other people in the audience also. But we're going to have a break. So just to shortly summarize, with Ania showed the challenges as an entrepreneur has, so that you need to have a bit more financially aligned investments, entrepreneurial aligned investments. And we also see now some models how governments can look into how to structure financing and how to use certain models to use the financing. But we now have a break, and after the break, we're really looking. We're going to look to the investors, and how do investors look to how to support public-private partnerships, how to finance these innovations and investments in smart cities. So we have now a 15-minute break. We will be back here on 10 to 3 o'clock, and then we continue with the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. May I get your attention, please? Please have a seat. This is the last session today. After 1 hour, and you will have a chance to go to Sagrada Familia. You can see that how the city, how beautiful it is, just as how smart it is. But last panel, but not least, it is very important to fund the project for the smart cities. So all the topics we have discovered for the past 3 days are very important. But funding is extremely important to make everything realized, make everything true. The reason why I'm the moderator for this session is because I'm a banker. So anything related to fund. I'm Gao Erji. I'm Vice President of Caixin Media and Executive President of Caixin Insight. My firm is a China-based business media. We report all the business, financial, policy, and capital market-related issues in China, and we deliver our news to the global markets. At the same time, we have been heavily empowered by technology, but as a banker, I joined the company 5 years ago. After that, we have done 5 acquisitions, which means this media has been heavily empowered by finance as well. So that's why actually we have a thorough understanding about smart city. It should be heavily empowered by financial markets. And at the same time, all the funding ways should be highly related to how the smart city will be operated. So we have 2 common senses. One is from the financial market, another one from the smart city. So I will be very honored to introduce the 4 panelists today. All of them are very, very professional and insightful. The first one is Ms. Anne Fournier, the Chief Innovative Procurement Squad from Digital Police and Weapon, Belgium. Second one is Ms. Angela Piles, the Head of Structured Finance of Elecnor, Madrid, Spain. Third one is Mr. Michael Flynn, Government and Public Service Financial Advisory Leader of Deloitte, Dublin, Ireland. Fourth one is Mr. Francesco Gonçalves, the project manager of Energy Cities, Brussels, Belgium. Let's welcome. In the very beginning, I think four of you will have 8 to 10 minutes to give a speech or presentation. Michael, would you start with this?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Do we have a clicker? Okay. Good afternoon. Every week, 1.5 million people move to cities across the world. That puts pressure on existing infrastructure, but also needs new infrastructure. What we've done also is layered on, and with greater pressure from investors, society, as well as the climate issues, sustainability is becoming more and more of an issue and has to be included in the infrastructure decision and the building of cities. So the various studies are saying that there's about, if you include both of those, there's about 5 trillion required every year to invest in order to meet those demands. Now, on top of that, we as the citizen are using this more and more often. And our public services, we expect to be on this, which is driving more and more the requirement for smart and for tech to be embedded fully in terms of our city and how it operates, but also that 5 trillion of infrastructure spend. So that all sounds great and fantastic, particularly for everybody else that's out in this expo. But the challenge when you're thinking about funding and financing this is that tech changes, and it changes so fast relative to the infrastructure. So you now have embedded infrastructure that has a 30, 50-year life cycle, and you have technology that has a 6, 12, 3-year, whatever it is, life cycle, because it needs to be updated. And when you're a poor banker or a funder and trying to figure this out, and you want to get your capital invested for a long time, that's something you've got to figure out. So it's a challenge that has to be sorted. Thankfully, there's a mix, an acceptance that private sector needs to be brought into here, and it's how that is done. Because if you go back to that 5 trillion, only about 50% of that can be satisfied by the public sector based on current budgets. So there's a big gap, a big need, and we need to solve that. But the key bit is around value. For us is, where's value being generated? Who's making that value? Who's benefiting from that value? And most importantly, and when you come to funding and financing, is who should be paying for that value? So when we look at it, we look at direct, indirect, and we also look at asset recycling. We've just, some of you have to see a piece of paper on your chairs. We've just launched a paper today around the virtues of value capture for cities. Because if you look at direct value, it's what this project is delivering in terms of value, and will I as a user pay for that directly or indirectly? But am I receiving benefit and therefore should pay it? That could be a tax, could be anything, but or a toll, or as you go into more tech, is that you're paying for that service, for that Wi-Fi as you go in a city. But again, it's I can see the service and I'm paying for it directly. The challenge is particularly around indirect value. Because while public sector is not always great at charging revenue or making charges for users, and the private sector is better, but they accept that, but they can understand that there's a need to charge. Oftentimes, it's the indirect that public sector misses. And the reality is, unless you plan that very early, once the asset is built and once the infrastructure is invested, you've no chance of capturing that value. So it's gone and it's with whoever else has got it, and maybe that's just not fair. So what we're saying is indirect value. So take a city. The easiest way to explain it is, so a light rail system that goes through a district. Either side of that, there's value increase on the real estate. So is it fair that all of those owners of that real estate should get all of that value? Can you charge? Can you collect something on that? And we did a study in Ireland on it where the real estate, each resi unit went up 155,000 in value because of the light rail. But what the government did is charge them for when they was being built 55,000. So there was a fair share of cost versus the increase in value and that benefit. But going back to the light rail, is that if you've got a station, you've got thousands of people going through that station, and while it is, can you sell the development value above that station for retail, commercial, resi, and making sure you're benefiting from all of the value that's coming in there? Because if you don't, as a public sector, and you can joint venture on that, and obviously, is that everybody else around that station is going to build the required services and gather that benefit. So we're working on a number of projects where we're using those type of tools in order to fund the assets. The last is asset recycling. We all know that there is plenty of assets that the public sector owns, that others may gain greater value out of it. It doesn't mean selling off everything. It just means better utilization and seeing what value you can achieve out of that. And when we say we put all of this together, that's when we determine what the free cash flow is in terms of funding and financing, because there are multiple sources of finance available in the world. And this is ever increasing, and that tech piece versus the infrastructure piece is improving the more sustainable it is, because sustainable investors and sustainable lenders understand that dynamic between the tech and the long term. So when we're looking at this for clients, we're saying now that we understand what your cash flows are, the timing of it, what values are, whether it's large chunks of money or available over time, is now we can try and match this to the different financing sources. One of the challenges that public sector does is it predetermines how it's going to procure and putting all of that deal together. So we've all heard, I'm going to do this a public project, or I'm going to do a PPP. And it's either one or the other. However, the reality is that there's hundreds of different models here between a pure public and a pure private transaction. And so what we're saying is actually look at all these options, because you may use multiple elements of these to deliver the entire transaction and to get the best into the individual cities and matching that to the relative financing and making sure you capture that value. So it sounds complicated. Well, we've put it that it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. So the first thing is understand your value and make sure you do that right at the very start. The second bit is look at all of your financing options and make sure you're utilizing all of those options and bring from local and international sources, debt and equity and different sources available, including vendor financing. And it's only when you've done all of that that you determine how you procure this and how you deliver it. And for us, a well-planned project, well-developed and done in this process is how you drive towards success of smart city projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. It's a lovely framework. Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Right. Thank you very much for joining us at the time of the day, at the last day of the event, which is always hard to keep on listening presentations. I work for a group called Elecnor. I'm the responsible of structured finance, which means responsible of finding financial solutions, either for our customers or for our projects, in those that we invest. And the purpose of my presentation is going to be to explain you a little bit what the LECNOR is, because I think it will give you a background of what I'm going to explain later. What experience we have in financing infrastructure, and finally, what the challenges we think there are in financing smart cities. LECNOR is a 60-year-old group. We are active in 55 countries, more than 40,000 professionals. And for give you a sense of size, our turnover last year was 2.3 billion euros. We do have two different businesses, the business in infrastructure, which is the EPC business, which means the engineering, procurement, and construction business, where we have provide global solutions for developing infrastructure. But we do have as well an investment business. Therefore, we are investing in infrastructure, covering the full cycle, from development, external financing, construction, and management, more than anything else on energy assets. These two businesses are correlated, they are synergies. We started as contractors, and the evolution of the sector, the participation of private sector in infrastructure, leads most of the people in our sector to become as well investors. You have there a map of where we are. We're strong in Latin America, North America. We're growing very quickly in Africa in the recent years. We are also present in Europe and some countries that far as Australia. We have a lot of activity in energy-related activities, power, transmission, distribution, and generation, telecoms, construction, environment and water, maintenance, facilities, gas, and railways. As investors, we have a smaller focus in terms of activities. We do have investments in electricity infrastructure, basically concessions of transportation of electricity in Latin America, gas infrastructure, transport contracts for transporting gas through pipelines, power generation, basically in renewables, thermosolar, PV, and wind power, and environment, water and waste treatment plants. In terms of assets, we have assets of 0.5 billion managed in our group on the activities that I mentioned before, most of them located in Latin America and in Spain and some in North America. These are some pictures of what we do. Transmission lines in Chile, substations, I think it's Chile as well, building a wind power in Brazil, satellites for radars for Earth observation follow-up of some of the satellites we have built, water waste treatment plant, Spain. This is distribution water, a connection of a desalination plant in Algeria. This is some works on trains, railways. So what we do in a smart city, is basically a consequence of our activity as contractors. We've been for years building and providing services to utilities, municipalities, all type of corporates, and we have incorporated technology into the service that we had been provided to our customers, which represents more or less in this moment 5 to 10% of our total turnover. So we work on consultancy, maintenance, design, integration, development, monitoring in areas like environment, mobility, governance, living, and economy. Basically, what we do is to integrate different technologies. We keep very intensively what the new developments are in the market to adapt those solutions into the services that we provide to our customers, always looking for providing the best service, the most added value possibility, and be proactive identifying solutions. This will be a nice way of representing some of our activity in the vertical perspective on ICT integration, IT infrastructure, business intelligence, and geospatial analytics. So what we have learned financing all the type of activities that we said before, that in the developed markets, normally financing is varied, and there are many different opportunities. So it's only when there is a PPP situation, a private sector involvement, where we need to go with the money in our hands, equity or providing debt. We have also found solutions to energy efficiency projects in Spain for public lighting, where we have organized vendor financing that has been even refinanced, selling the credit rights to an energy efficiency fund. When we talk about Africa or Asia, then our customers require EPC plus finance solutions, which means the contracting solution plus finance. In this case, we work with the support of export credit agencies that permit banks to finance these risks with a credit guarantee for covering the credit risk of the repayment of the debt. And basically, we work with sovereign risk in these cases. And this is an example of the work we've done on one hydro plant in Angola. In LATAM, it's a market that gives a lot of different situations because there is different level of development of markets. We have situations where we are only EPC contractors, where we are EPC contractors by financiers, like I mentioned in Africa. We are in PPP or IPP initiatives. We mobilize funds from banks, IFDs, multilateral agencies, different investors. We have even able to refinance part of the debt we have in our projects in the market, both in wind power and also transmission lines in Brazil and Chile. We have placed a number of bonds issues. And we are also doing vendor financing with a discount of construction certificates for the good rating corporate customers. So all that knowledge that we have from financing infrastructure, I think we can put it in value in terms of doing the smart cities, because even it's different, there are a lot of common things, in my opinion, that we can apply. Well, there was a slide before explaining the different sources of financing that are probably familiar to you, from grants to international transfers, supranational financing, taxes, debt, fees from users, assets, sales or rentals, vendor finance, or what will be the private initiative, which includes equity and commercial debt provided from different players. For the municipalities, I understand that nowadays is not the best moment to get debt. Everyone has limited capacity for public funding. There are some risks of municipalities which are not bankable, because we think on big cities, but we have to think as well in cities in emerging markets, or even cities in our home markets which are very indebted and they are not palatable for issuing bonds or so on. Sometimes when we think on transferring the cost to the users is politically or socially impossible. I'm thinking, for example, some of our experience in Africa where people don't want to pay for the water. They don't want to pay for the electricity. They think that the state has to provide that. So it's even more difficult to think that they have to provide for more sophisticated type of services. And there is an amount of money in grants, but it's always difficult to, from a bureaucratic and a implementation point of view, it's not always easy. What about the private sector? In this case, these assets are difficult because they have a nature of sometimes intangible, very techy, which is not easy for the typical financier to understand or to visualize. They are capital intensive, but on the other hand, sometimes they are they have high technical obsolescence. So if you need time to get a return, combined to the three other things, it makes it difficult for attracting private equity. If it is untested, there is lack of experience, lack of track record. All that, what it's going to do is to increase the risk perception and make the capital run away. If there is uncertainty in the regulatory framework, it's not good news either. And something which is even more complicated, if you have all the other things solved, is that you need to isolate the assets from a cash flow point of view. And that is not easy, particularly we are talking about brownfield projects. Another situation that we foresee is that we're talking about the various, very different type of projects in a multi-sectorial environment, and singularity is not easy for financing. And sometimes the projects are too big, but sometimes are too small, which is also a problem. So when I get my colleagues from business development and tell me that they need finance and I have to be creative, innovative, disruptive, and smart, I tend to run away because this means that the projects are not functional because they don't have the good definition. So the good news that I would like with you is that we have in the market a lot of experience financing infrastructure including all types of infrastructure, even energy. It's a consolidated sector nowadays with a lot of experience and a deep knowledge of how to do things. There are a lot of players, specialized financial investors. There's a lot of liquidity in the market. This is now, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but now there is a lot of money in the market. And there's a lot of people looking for new opportunities. And a traditional evolution from the infrastructure investors, infrastructure bankers, people like Eleanor should be investing and financing smart cities. So we have a global market. There are many opportunities in many places of the world, and there is political and social support. So I think that with an adequate risk analysis, risk sharing, alignments of interest, with the right partners, with a business model that provides a return, well-structured, with legal structure, good governance, etc., there is an opportunity to finance our project. So I would summarize my main conclusions of getting finance as to identify projects which are really a need, not just fashion or, well, talking about it, a solid and predictable project cash flow, that's vital, adequate return, a good project structuring, the adequate partners, and a good team to move forward the project. If you have all the components in your pot, I'm pretty sure you're going to find funders among the different players that are in the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Francisco, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess my presentation comes really in the right point, because it really connects with what was said until now. So the European Commission estimates that there is a need, already an annual need of 150 billion to 200 billion of euros to invest in energy and climate-related plans, so we can meet the 2030 energy and climate goals that Europe has. And public money alone will not be enough, and there is a need to mobilize urgently private investment. Cities are not only in the core of the energy transition process, they are also key, and they can mobilize significant amount of finance just because they can drive significant investment programs and to aggregate smaller projects into more sizable packages. Sorry. There are already some very relevant instruments in place, financial instruments, that have been very useful for mainly big cities. But most part of the European cities are medium and small-sized ones. For instance, just 100 cities in Europe have a population that is bigger, bigger than 250,000 inhabitants. So most part of these medium-sized cities and small-sized cities have shown already some barriers, for instance, in lack of capacity, human resources, conservative approaches towards project financing, and lack of skills in preparing investment packages. Also, in these instruments that are already in place and that are more addressed to bigger cities, these smaller cities and medium-sized cities cannot commit or have shown difficulties to commit to the investments that are required or to the leverage effects associated. A survey from the Covenant of Mayors. The Covenant of Mayors is the most important initiative in Europe for climate change mitigation and adaptation driven by municipalities. And at the moment, we are talking about 9,000 cities that are committed to the Covenant of Mayors. And the survey has shown two things. First is that the planned investments for the next decade are, the investment packages are smaller than 5 million euros. And the second thing that this survey shows is that the cities are still planning to do these investments by accessing to their own funds, so municipal budgets, and to access to other kinds of grants. But the minority, it's about 10% of the respondents say they might consider going to private financing. And how can we do, or what can I'm proposing here to tell you, and how can we change a bit the situation? So we want to present the European City Facility, and the goal of the European City Facility is to support financially and technically cities and their groupings to accelerate the implementation of their ambitious energy and climate plans. And the best question you can do to me now, but what is this program different from the other ones that are not working so well to these cities? Well, my answer is this, because in this program we want cities to have a say on how the financial support will best fit their own needs. And this is going to be done in two ways. The first is that our consortium of the European City Facility represents 2,700 cities. We are city networks. Through the Covenant of Mayors, we have an outreach of 9,000 cities. And the city needs, combined with our expertise and also the partnerships already in place, will be key also to help cities overcome this investment gap. The second thing is that we want the strategic decisions of this facility also to be taken by cities, and we invite cities also to participate in the design and to be participating in some of the decisions, for instance, in the thematic priorities of this facility. And this facility, what we want to do is to support the cities to deliver in 2 years, more than 200 investment concepts that will trigger more than 300 million euros in investment in energy and climate, and that will raise capacity of 500 municipal staff. And this will be done in two ways, financially and technically. In the technical part and tailor-made part, we are going to work and to put in place a group of pool of country experts that will support locally the cities and in national language to access this facility and to this instrument. And moreover, we are going to also provide sets of capacity building events, networking, matchmaking events, also to give capacity to the cities to sit on a table with financing institutions. And what is an investment concept about? Investment concept is a kind of pre-financing, it's a kind of pre-feasibility study that includes a clear identification of the potential project pipeline, has a market analysis, a market barriers analysis, governance analysis, legal analysis, has a first financial strategy and clear roadmap for implementation. And how can cities access to this funding? Well, there will be a call for proposals, and during the application process, cities will be invited to work and to apply to this facility. We'll work with the country experts that will guide them to successfully present a bid, and upon positive evaluation, cities will get financial support of up to 60,000 euros in a lump sum to develop in 6 to 12 months an investment concept that then will be the facility will be monitoring and follow up the implementation of this investment concept. And how this investment concept or how this facility can be successful? Well, everything through the implementation and transformation rate. So the transformation rate from investment concept into the project implementation. And this can be seen in two ways. The first is from the city perspective, is they consider this as a useful tool to decrease and fill the investment gap, and to the financial institutions as if they see it as a good basis to trigger financing decisions. So a good facility will be the one that will increase visibly in the next years the investment in energy and climate at local level. And the last question that you can have for me is, when can I access to this funding or this support? First of all, you need to be a city or represent a city. And I can tell you that in 2020, early 2020, we will launch officially this facility, and in mid-2020, we will launch, hopefully, the first call for proposals for city to access to this instrument. So my message for you is, spread the message around, be ready, and good luck.
Thank you, Francisco. And it's your turn. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Anne Fournier. I'm head of procurement of Digipolis. Digipolis is the ICT provider of the city of Antwerp, so we are presenting also the city of Antwerp. Also for, we do everything what has to do with IT for the city, but also for the police department, healthcare, so it's a bunch of responsibilities that we have regarding IT. So we are facing a lot of challenges regarding innovation, getting innovation into the cities. And I think that reaches out to the presentations that have already been mentioned, that there must be a way of getting this innovation, getting fundings to have this innovation into the cities. And therefore, I would like to have a little talk about how we did that with two different projects. The first project, first of all, I think you all know Antwerp, so I don't have to mention that much about it anymore. Of course, it's the most popular city of Belgium, and we have the second biggest harbor in Europe. Digipolis I already mentioned, but where I want to come to is why we should, as a city or as Digipolis, do on innovative procurement. Why? Because we have to get innovative solutions into our city. And if you look at the normal procedures of procurement for a city, it's mostly quite a long way to go. It takes a long time, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of administration to get new technologies into a city. And therefore, because of this fast evolution of these technical changes and innovation, because we're also facing a decrease in IT budgets and a growing need to digital public services, smart city applications, we have to look for ways to get a way of procurement that still can enter this innovation into a city. Therefore, there are some procurement processes that can help you as being a city for getting solutions, innovative solutions into your city, like pre-commercial procurement, competitive dialogue, and so on. But I want to emphasize on the first and the last procedure, pre-commercial procurement and the buy from startup procedure. I will go through the pre-commercial procurement quite fast. The only thing I want to mention is that at this event we had our closing event on our project of Select for Cities, and it was a cooperation between Helsinki, Copenhagen, and Antwerp to get a new city-wide data-driven Internet of Everything solution where all kind of solution can be plugged in. And because of that one, we used a new way of procurement, a new approach towards public procurement of R&D. And it's a phased procedure with a funneling of candidates, and the number of suppliers during the process will decrease, but what is very important for the contractors is that the funding per contractor, per phase will increase. So it's a benefit, a big benefit for the contractors. It's a phase, as I mentioned, a funneling phase, with first of all an open market consultation to see if there is also already a solution on the market. Then we send out the tenders, and at that time all kind of parties are coming in, and we try to combine also some suppliers to get the best solution for us. So in a first phase, they came up with a solution design of that platform, how it could meet our requirements. The second phase, they built a prototyping, and in the third phase, we went on to go testing that prototype with 2 cases in the city of Antwerp and Helsinki. If we go through the process, we had in phase 1, we had about 10 contracts. We funneled it down towards 5 contracts in the second phase and 3 in the third phase, and 3 suppliers have now made a prototype of their platform that we can use by now. But what is very important and very good and competitive in this way is that these 3 contractors, they already have their solutions being commercialized in the market during the time that we were in those phases. So it's for a very it's a benefit for these companies, and it was during the process of this pre-commercial procurement. What are the benefits for the supplier? As I mentioned, and it's also a benefit for the procurer, is that the funding comes for this project comes from the European Commission in Horizon 2020 fundings, together with our fundings from the City of Antwerp, Copenhagen and Helsinki, and so that the contractor himself doesn't have to give that much funding anymore. So the funding is coming from the governmental organizations, which gives also potential new opportunities, because as soon as they have made this prototype, they can see if they can commercialize it further on. What's in for us? We get new, better ideas. They go in competition. These competitors, so they going into competition, and we are getting out beautiful solutions, better solutions, because they go into competition. So these are the most beneficial things that are coming out for the pre-commercial procurement. But definitely, we started in 2015 with this project. We are now 2019, and we now ended up with the 3 solutions, and we had the final phase here in Barcelona itself. So it takes a couple of years. And the problem is that if it takes such a long time, maybe the innovative character of this platform can be gone, because the innovation grows and renews every year, every time, every month. So there are always new technologies coming in. And if we want to grab those new technologies as being a governmental organization, we have to look for them on the market. But as we are a city, it's not easy to get these ideas. So we have to find a way to see if we can buy from startups. Because in startups, you mostly have these new ideas, this innovation, this creativity, this flexibility. And therefore, we as Digipolis, we built a community and an ecosystem to get these startups working for us, giving us the newest technologies. But it means that we had to look at our architecture, and we also had to look to customize procurement process. And I will show you a small film on how we did, or how we entered in this new way of thinking in the architecture as being a city. There's no sound.
As a result, Digipolis, the city's IT partner, is bound to build solutions capable of addressing any new digital initiative or evolution. To meet this need, the Antwerp City Platform as a Service, or ACPAS, was created. ACPAS is a collection of small reusable blocks of software called engines, such as notifications, workflow, payment, and profile management. These engines can be combined in various ways to build any desired scalable and future-proof software application. Faster, more flexible, and cost-efficient, as each outdated block is easily replaced without having to rebuild the entire application. Today, ACPAS has a great variety of reusable building blocks on offer that, once combined, can create nearly every conceivable end solution. And recently, Internet of Things, blockchain, and artificial intelligence were added as well. What if we had not taken this road? What if there was no such thing as ACPAS? The answer is obvious. We would be rebuilding a lot of components from scratch over and over again. With this new approach to development, from vast monolithic applications to modular solutions comprised of adequate engines, we are able to respond to the city's digital ambitions in an agile way. Want to learn more? Go to acpas.digipolis.be.
The third thing that we did was building a new community to get this, to buy these solutions, and it was ended on the idea of the pre-commercial procurement by funneling the candidates. They have 2 weeks to get interests, to show their interest on a challenge that we are putting into the market. Then they come over, they pitch their idea, and how they have to convince us why they are the best party to contract with, and then they have at that moment they start to have an offer towards us. And the two most important things are that it is a very flexible procedure. No admin, just 20 paper of administration, and the IPR, which is very important, can be kept by the contractor. So the contractor can keep their IPR so that as soon as they have built a solution for us, they can resell that solution towards other cities, which is a step up to new governmental organizations. So it's a very good strategic way of working with startups, and this is what I wanted to share with you. These are the results. So from 2015 till now, we have built on this kind of way of procurement. So we have put 329 challenges into the market, and we ended up with 304 contracts. As you can see, we are working now with more than 680 startups working on these innovative solutions to build our platform, which is, of course, a huge result, and it means it works. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anne. As we have 5 minutes, and we are actually very thrilled about the framework Michael has given to us. Funding is not only funding. Actually, we want to make the funding to make the project more inclusive with good governance and good incentive to all the counterparties. So would you want to share some other framework or some theories to us as well, Michael? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, it's great listening to the various things here on the panel. I mean, it's interesting. The startup piece is a challenge. You're bringing in innovation. You bring all the things that you want to bring for a smart city. Challenge is that when you say, well, go roll it out, and that I want you to do the full city, particularly a service that's beyond IT, there's elements there that the scale and their ability to do it is challenging. So one of the models we've been looking at is what we call the alliancing approach. So it's saying where you've got a contract, so you've got public sector, you've got probably a number of vendors who can do multiple things and have scale, but you also have financing partners in there, and that they combine, and there's a procurement done to get them onto the alliancing list or the sort of master service agreements. But it allows you to put things out that require them to go get the innovation from the startups, but you still have this large entity behind and a balance sheet and the financing and the ability to do all the things you want them to do, as a city you want them to protect in place. So but that is something that we do not do. So that's what I was mentioning. So if we see, we look. So as a city, we put not a tender in the market. As we put a challenge in the market, we put a problem. So we mention as a city, look, we have a problem as a city, so please can you help me? And at the time, you get much more. So if you do not restrict or you really put the requirements on the table, then you don't get innovation anymore. So you get them, and then it's really like the city wants it, because the city participates during the whole process of going through the criteria, and it's really upon their needs. This doesn't stop any of that. This is all it is the implementation piece. So the challenge, I get back to, it's great. We got a fantastic new pilot. You got a startup. All that innovation, all that you've just talked about in terms of you going out to the market and getting all of that, and then you say, now put it out in the whole city. And what the alliancing approach allows you to do is still go out and get all of that innovation and do all those things, but when you say put it out into the market, is that you have these mechanisms, and they still need to use that procurement and connect with the startup and bring them along, but you have a mechanism to make it bigger and stronger and do the thing, because you can't have it fail as a city. You don't want to have that reputation that we're putting things into the city that don't always work, or maybe that's that's the mix of innovation.
It's sometimes it's good that it fails, because you can learn from it, and I think cities should take that risk. And if you have these small building blocks that can connect with each other in this architecture, the risk is much more smaller than you give to the market the whole process, the whole network or the whole platform to be built. So if just one piece of it fails, it doesn't matter. You just go back on the market, because it is a procedure of 6 weeks, not that longer.
Yeah, when I talk about the fail, is that it goes. So that it's now gone from
after
here.
It has been built.
Yeah, so it's built, and now you say, okay, well, now bring it out to here. If it fails when it's out here and it's all on the city, that's when you've got that's when you've got bigger partners to help, and that you've already selected or are bought in on all your approach. It's connected with public sector. It's creating an ecosystem to deliver exactly what you're looking to do as a city, but allowing this innovation. And all of the things you're talking about, absolutely required. And the more we do the smart piece element, that's more and more required. It's that when you roll it out to the entirety, that's when you can't have a fail. That small pilots, absolutely, that's what you're doing. You're testing.
Then you have to build on it and build on it and build on it, and there you have other partners coming in, so that to make it more secure. I'm sure. Yeah.
And that's where the alliance works.
Yeah.
Good. Good to see that you have something in common. Time constraint, so we have to call it a day. It's a little pity that we cannot cover all the topics, but indeed we have shared quite a lot of good stories. I will put something new for maybe next year's session, that today we have covered quite a lot of topics about finance, how finance to empower the smart city. But when the smart city can empower the finance, smart finance, how it can put forward the smart city. That would be a great idea as well. So that's what we are looking for the next year. So let's call it a day. Thank you so much for all the panelists and all the audience. Thank you. And we will pass the platform to Ronald. Thank you.
Yeah, there's still a question.
Oh, please.
If I may, thank you very much. My name is Carlos Sanchez. I work for the Smart City Infrastructure Fund. I have a question for Francisco. We represent institutional investors. We are investing in smart city applications all over the world, anything that has to do with data collection, carriage, and storage. My question is if you would consider institutional investors as part of your financing pool.
So this financial instrument that I explained is directed to cities and to representatives of cities that will have to develop these pre-feasibility studies, and then to present their project and their investment concepts to the financiers and to get the funding to do the project they wanted. So the goal is to put cities and financiers at the same level of understanding.
And the question is, who are those financiers that you have in mind? Do you have like a list or?
Everyone.
He could be wrong.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Angie, for this great panel, and thank you all. I think 8 great speakers we had today, and I know this is a smart city, but I did really old-fashioned, and I just took some notes on paper. What I learned in this session is that at the start with Ania. From the startup, the founder perspective, we need to have much more aligned, founder-aligned capital. That was one of the points that kept in my mind there. And afterwards, we are taking into what can we do with big data? How can cities use that big data, that information, how to build that ecosystem, and to make sure that the investments that they do are done properly, because you can only do it once if you build a new area of a city. And after the break with this panel, interesting to see the different views on finance. And so from Deloitte is that there are so many different types of PPP. There is not just one PPP firm. There's everything in between you can use. Interesting. Learned a lot from that. And Eleanor also that there's so many sources of finance available, but it also makes it much more complicated. So be innovative, be smart, indeed, to connect these types of sources. And indeed, the European City Facility being launched now, I think for cities here, take a look to see what kind of support you can get, financial and technical support. 200 investment structures. It would be interesting to see what comes out of that, and I think that a lot of them can be replicated by other cities. And in the end, from the city of Antwerp, the innovative procurement, and especially how to connect indeed to small companies and how to connect to startups. And then I think we circle around back to the startups and back to how can we get innovation and indeed connect also to these small companies, startups, small building blocks, and involve them in your procurement. I want to thank you all for your attention. So it was the last session, not only of today, for this whole conference. So I think you all are very passionate to know more about finance. For now, thank you all panelists, and hope to see you next year. Thank you.